In today's episode, we're going to talk about whether the mentally disabled are allowed to vote, and if so, should they? So don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you stay up to date when new episodes come out. Being diagnosed with a short or long-term disability does not directly impact your right to vote as a US citizen, but your ability to vote could be affected by the state you live in and your state's rules. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, anyone with a mental disability who has an understanding of what it means to vote is allowed to vote in federal elections. So let's define a disability. The word disability is a broad term that can have numerous connotations. Disabilities can also be defined in many different ways, but many definitions include the area that a disability is a condition that limits an individual mentally and/or physically, and may affect sensory, movement, and processing skills. A disability could be anything from a short-term injury that affects a person's ability to think, move, and travel, to a long-term impairment that requires constant care from a guardian and/or medical professional. Disabilities do not discriminate around election time, and it's helpful to know your rights when the time comes to vote. So can you vote in the US if you have a disability? Voting laws in the US have been changing since the US Constitution was signed in 1776. At the time the Constitution was signed, only a small group of individuals could vote. This group included white males who owned land and were at least 21 years old. Now, voting laws are much different. The right to vote is given to all US citizens who have not been disenfranchised or stripped of the right to vote. But what about those with mental and/or physical disabilities? Can you vote if you've been diagnosed with a disability? The caveat is that voting laws are still partially determined by each state, and states may have rules and regulations on things like incompetency and those deemed incapable to vote, as determined by the state. So what is the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, and how does it help people with disabilities? Passed in Congress in 2002, the Help America Vote Act was put in place to help with the entire voting system and voter access. Essentially, it created standards and procedures that states follow and continuously implement for federal elections. So what exactly does this mean for people with disabilities? It means that with HAVA in place, standards must be met so that anyone who has the right to vote has an equal chance of voting on election day. Here are some of the programs and procedures started by HAVA. States must keep databases for statewide voter registration, except in North Dakota where registration is not required. States must have processes for proper voter identification. Voter information must be readily available. The Election Assistance Commission, EAC, must conduct research to help improve elections. And voter equipment must be tested and certified. So let's talk about voting standards from start to finish. HAVA is meant to help with all aspects of voting, from voter registration to voting at your poll place on election day. This means that everything from accommodations to specially trained voting personnel must be provided and/or available if needed. Now, what about accommodations for voting in federal elections for those with disabilities? HAVA requires that states provide accessible voting locations for people with disabilities to participate in federal elections. This includes accommodations for individuals with mental impairments, visual impairments, and physical impairments, and accommodations for the elderly. If there isn't a fully accessible location, voters must be given an alternative location they can go to, or voters must be given another option for voting on or before Election Day. So what is the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, EAC? The EAC was established as part of HAVA in 2002. It is a commission clearinghouse resource that keeps all the information and review procedures for HAVA. This includes everything from info on how federal elections are administered to voter registries. Essentially, it's a go-to public resource where individuals can get information on things like voting software, studies on election administration, implementation of voting system guidelines, and state and federal laws on voting administration. So thank you for listening to today's episode. More to come, and as always, take care of your money.